Greetings, fellow Watford fans. Omar here, and it's time for another Orns 10-minute take on Watford 2, Norwich City 1 at the Vic on Saturday night. Saturday night under the lights at the Vic as Watford defeat Norwich by that score of 2-1. On the night where Watford had to have the win here after two consecutive defeats, Norwich coming into this game with an opportunity to top the table at the end of the night and coming off their 3-2 home loss to Preston North End last week. Watford coming off two consecutive defeats. And as I say, a must win for Watford this one. And Watford got that win courtesy of a much more invigorated first half. They were much more energetic than they have been the last two games. Watford getting off the mark very early in this game, fairly early at least. They had a 13th minute penalty as Saar was tripped in the box, and the penalty pointed, referee pointed to the spot, and Imran Loser took the penalty and hit a pretty sharply hit ball, but went straight to Angus Gunn, who dove to his right hand side. It was a penalty that was telegraphed by Loser, and I think now Watford have to settle on a penalty taker, and I think Keenan Davis has to be the penalty taker for this team. No question about it. I think he is probably the best penalty taker that they've got at the moment. Watford have only had two penalties this season. Both of them were poorly struck. And although I think Losers was better than Ismail Assar's was back in August, I do think that despite the better strike from Loser, it was still a telegraphed strike. And it was pretty easy and comfortable a save from Gunn, who did a good job getting down to his right hand side to keep Watford at bay. Watford continued to press, though. They were undaunted by that penalty miss. And where you might have thought that Norwich were going to start to tilt the balance in their favor, Watford continued to press for the goal, and just 5 minutes later, they would get it. Ismail Assar on the left-hand side of the pitch today, and I thought that was a very good move by Slaven Bilic tactically to put Ismail Assar on the left side. He ended up being on the left. Sarr, usually on the right-hand side. Sema switched with him, and Sema was on the right. Something I was looking to see from a long time ago at Watford, to have Ken Sema on the right side earlier this season. That didn't happen, but finally today it did. And what you saw from Sarr was an energetic, lively Sarr in this match. And it was his endeavor and his positivity in the first half in the 18th minute, where he had a nice run, passed the balls, picked out Loser, who was the back post, who fired the ball home from fairly close range past Angus Gunn to give Watford the deserved 1-0 lead. Watford kicked on and looked much more emboldened by the goal that they scored. And in the 31st minute, they made it 2-0, doubling their lead through Keenan Davis, Davis scoring from close range after Ismail Assar, who got involved again in this one. A good run. He had a shot that was across the goal that bounced off a Norwich defender and cannoned to the waiting Keenan Davis. An opportunistic goal for him. He scored to make it 2-0, put the ball very calmly past Angus Gunn, just fired it past him low into the back of the net. He had a moment to compose himself in traffic and calmly slotted the ball home pretty strongly from Keenan Davis to make it 2. And I would like again to see Keenan Davis get that penalty taking duty, make it one person, make it consistent, whether he makes the kicks or not. Obviously, Keenan Davis, I think, has got a lot of experience, even though he's only 24. And I like the way he finishes. The way he finishes a very low and very sharp and quick and powerful shots into the back of the net. That's the kind of thing that penalty taker does. I think Keenan Davis would be really good in that role for Watford. So Watford are up 2-0 at the 31st minute of the game. And they continue to press forward. Norwich, though, even though Watford were playing much better than Norwich for the most part, Norwich had a lot of free kicks, a lot of corners, about 9 corners in the first half. So Norwich were not out of the game. Even before they did score, they were lively at times, Norwich. They did give Watford a few problems, but Watford kept Norwich at bay until the 45th minute. Josh Sargent, who is no stranger to scoring goals at Vicarage Road, did the same again in this game, scoring on the 45th minute mark. Really good running from Kieran Dowell, who I thought was Norwich's best player of the night. He passed the ball to Josh Sargent. Sargent slotted it between the legs of Dan Gosling to make it 2-1. And I think that goal spurred Norwich on. There were a couple of adjustments that Norwich made in the second half, tweaked a couple of things here and there. And that was a very important moment for Norwich in the second half because they started much better of the sides in the second half, down 2-1. They kept pushing. Watford did not start well. And they've had this problem throughout the season in the second halves of these games, not starting them very well at all and allowing the opposition to start having much more time on the ball. And what Watford needed to do in this game that they didn't do very well was to close down Norwich better and to give Norwich very little time on the ball and to close the space around Norwich and make Norwich uncomfortable in possession. Watford did not do that in the second half of this game. They needed to do a lot more of it. I know you can't do it for an entire half or an entire game, but you have to be able to prepare to make Norwich very uncomfortable in possession, disrupt their rhythm, make sure you close down space, give them as little time on the ball as possible. As I say, you've got to pick your spots when you do that. But Watford didn't do that at all for the vast majority of this second half of the game. And I think that's where Norwich were able to get more freedom down the channels and through the middle of the pitch. And I think that as that went on, Norwich became an increasing threat to Watford and looked more likely to score until the substitution of Kieran Dowell. I thought taking Kieran Dowell off in this game for Norwich was a big mistake. I don't think that Dean Smith got that right at all. He was, I thought, the most dangerous player Norwich had. And I think that was a big mistake taking him off. I thought that that was a key because Watford then brought on João Pedro around the same time or just after, and the balance was redressed to Watford's side, and Watford began to get a bit more possession. Now they didn't stick with the possession; they didn't stick, they didn't hold. I would have loved to see Watford control the possession better when they had the ball and try to be much more disciplined and judicious. At times they were in the second half. Watford they did show you some of that, but it wasn't consistent enough. João Pedro began to work a bit more stature into the possession and the way they kept the ball and kept fairly compact as well. They were going down the left-hand side and they were also spreading the play to the right. And you saw a couple of crosses come in, some really good ones coming in, but there were no Watford heads on the end of those crosses to put them in. So Watford weren't entirely out of the second half, but I did think that the impetus for Watford was that João Pedro substitution. Him coming in was a big factor. I think Slaven Bilic got this game right tonight. He got all of the variables correct. Liked his substitutions. They were disciplined. They were timely. I thought that was a very important move to bring in João Pedro. And you saw Watford get a bit more of the possession. They began to work their way into the game. They looked much more of a threat at times. But Norwich still, overall in the second half, they had the advantage of the second half and should have scored through Josh Sargent late in the game. But the biggest player of the game was Dan Gosling, who had really made up a lot of running to catch up with Josh Sargent, to stay with him, to push him further to the right side of the pitch as he was bearing in on goal one-on-one with Daniel Batman. And Gosling was able to shepherd him away from there and to the right-hand side and then make a challenge, a really good one, to keep Josh Sargent at bay. Josh Sargent has scored twice at Vicarage Road back in January, and this surely would have been another goal for him had he been able to go in on goal. Craig Cathcart was left for dust. Didn't have a clue there, Cathcart, and he just doesn't have the pace to keep it with Josh Sargent, who is younger and faster and quicker. And if it wasn't for Dan Gosling, the veteran, who was out of position, playing out of position in the back, I thought that would have probably been 2-2. But Gosling, I think, made the play of the game there. Daniel Batman made some big saves in the first and second half. An incredible point blank save that he pushed onto the crossbar as well. Norwich did not have a shot on target in the entire second half, and that's due to the defense. The defense I thought was very well marshaled tonight for Watford. I liked how William Troost-Ekong played. I really thought that he had a very good game. He has not hurt you this season, Troost-Ekong. I think he's been very good in the 2 or 3 games he's played. I think he's been disciplined. He's been mature. I think he's a bit more stout in defense, obviously, than Kabasele is. Kabasele is injured at the moment. And I also like Cathcart tonight, despite that one moment where he got beat for pace. Cathcart was very good. And I also like the way that Dan Gosling marshaled his new position very well indeed. So I think the defending was good tonight, much better than it had been the last couple of games. Disciplined, and the game management for Watford was very good as well. So those were very important moments for Watford tonight in this one. And I think, again, Dean Smith taking off Kieran Dowell, who I thought was, again, Norwich's best player. Big mistake, I think, with that sub. And although Norwich looked dangerous at times, Watford held on, rode out the game, and should have scored again later on. Sarr, who was very good in the first half and not quite as good in the second half, I think should have scored, did not in the second half. And Kayembe, who came on later, didn't score, should have had a good shot at goal. Keenan Davis should have had 2 goals tonight. But look, Watford's performance was good enough, better than it had been in the last couple of games. And look, you can't complain if you're a Watford fan. I think very important 3 points for Watford, and they have to continue to play like this. They've knocked off Norwich now. They've beaten the top 3 teams in the championship at the moment. The current top 3, a 1-0 win over Sheffield United, and who are in second place at the moment, a 1-0 win over Burnley, who are top of the table at the moment, and a 2-1 win tonight over Norwich, who are third in the table at this moment. And again, all 3 of those teams were in the Premier League over the last 2 or 3 seasons. Of course, Watford and Norwich were there last season. They both got relegated, of course. And you saw how much this win meant for Watford. A very important win tonight as they defeated Norwich by a score of 2 goals to 1. I think Sarr moving him to that left side was very important. Bilic, a very important tactical switch because, again, against Blackpool last weekend, Watford really were hobbled in a way by Sarr being on the right side, because what Blackpool did is overstack their defense on that right side channel. And that meant that Sarr was not going to get a look in. There was no threat from him. And you were forcing the play in one area and one area only. And then Blackpool, pardon me, were just going to sit in and say, here, come and try and break us down. And so then that was very important there, because Bilic saw that tactical tweak. He made that adjustment, switched Sarr to the left-hand side of the pitch, and Sarr became much more lively, as I've said, much more energetic, much more into the game. And that's very important, because if you don't involve Ismaila Sarr during the first half of these games, he is not going to probably do anything for you the rest of the game. That is the way he plays. He's got to get into a rhythm right away. He's got to get himself into the game early and establish a rhythm and movement. And if he is not in the game for much of the first half of a game, he's probably not going to impact the game. He is not that kind of player who can just turn it on and off. That is not his game. He has to have a flow. He has to have a rhythm. He has to have a bit more about him in terms of the way he develops himself throughout the game. And when he is able to develop his play and his style in the first half of these games, that's when he's very dangerous. But if he's in the wilderness in these games and he's stuck out on the right channel and he's having overstacked defending, that they're breaking him down, they're throwing 2-3 defenders at him, he is not going to do anything in these games. And you saw in this game how important he was on that left side, because again, he got the first assist, he got the assist for the first goal, and he was a big factor in getting Watford their second goal with another shot cross that got deflected by a Norwich player and then fell to Keenan Davis. So Sarr was very much involved in this game in the first half. I thought his tracking back was very good in the second half. He was not as impactful in the second half of the game, but he still had a shot on an attempt on target or close to it. I think he had a shot on target in the game in the second half, and he still was very lively. So Sarr being on that left side, I think, is very important for Watford at the moment. Sema, who I wanted to see on the right-hand side, finally being picked there. Bilic really good there with his tactics. And Watford overall, their game management in the latter stages of this game was very good. The defending, I thought, very good, improved. The goalkeeper, very good, despite the goal that went in. I think Josh Sargent, he took the ball, took the goal well. No complaint there, really, with Norwich. Norwich are a dangerous outfit, but Teemu Pukki was nowhere to be found tonight for Norwich. I don't know what happened there. He was not a decisive factor in this game at all. Todd Cantwell, someone who used to be a big hero at Norwich, has been a big zero lately for them. A lot of personal issues off the pitch for him. He was at Bournemouth on loan last season, didn't do anything there, and tonight he didn't do much either. He didn't do much of anything, and you can see why he didn't start these games anymore. Not the same player that he used to be. He was a very dangerous player for Norwich in the past. I think his best days have come and gone. Todd Cantwell coming off the bench, very unusual, but it's been happening at Norwich for a while now. Just not the same player for me. He has some personal issues off the pitch, and you can see it. So you can see he's just not the same player. But Norwich tonight, I think you look at them, and they're going to be in and amongst it for the playoffs, if not promotion. And Kieran Dowell, a very dangerous player, and I was relieved to see him come off the pitch. Watford, as far as they're concerned, for me, I'm very pleased with the way they approached the game. They got on the front foot. They kept going. They were hungry. They were lively. They had positivity about them. And they certainly did not sit on a 1-0 lead or rest on their laurels. And even at 2-1, they didn't sit on it, despite Norwich dominating a lot of that second half. Watford still were going forward at times in that second half. And again, a very important win for Watford here now. They're on 20 points in 10th place, and they're just 5 points off the top of the table now. And they're almost a third of the way in to this championship season. So credit to Watford. Really good job tonight. A very well taken 3 points there. And on a night honoring Keith Eddy, the late captain for Watford back in the day, I think it's a performance that he would have been proud of. This has been the Orns 10-minute take.